Want to start and kick off a little bit just to get to know you, your backgrounds, where you were before, and how it kind of relates to where you are now.
Sure.
Tell us about you.
Yeah. Nice to meet everyone here. My name is Seiya. I head up marketing for 30 Madison. And if you haven't heard of 30 Madison, we're essentially creating a platform to help people with chronic conditions. And so it can range a lot from higher acuity conditions like migraines to lower acuity, less medically complex conditions like men's hair loss, as an example. And we do this by creating a lot of specialization in the brands that we create. So you may have heard some of the brands, and we've advertised in New York, so maybe you've seen us on the subways or buses or stuff like that. But Keeps, for instance, is our men's hair loss brand. We have a women's health brand called Nurex, and the migraines brand called Cove, among a few others. And so we're really trying to create and break down that level of specialist care, especially for people who have no access to specialist care. And we do this all completely asynchronously online.
Awesome. And you're over all marketing for all the brands?
That's correct, yeah. So, yeah, quite a lot. We have, it really ranges. And so we have what I'd say is more mature brands, like over, $100 million for levels of revenue, all the way to more nascent brands that were just starting out. Say Picnic, our allergies brand that we launched last year. So we're really just kind of grow again from that level of specialist care and be able to go extremely niche into that particular condition.
Okay, awesome. Tell us a little bit about your move to join 30 Madison, kind of, why you decided to take this step to a direct-to-consumer product focus.
Yeah, so I've been in this space for quite a bit, all in the tech space, like in varying different degrees of company sizes as well. Like I've had experience working out of the classic apartment, type of pre-Series A startup all the way to, pre-IPO stage. So the company I was at before is called Boxed. Some of you may have heard of them because they are definitely in the retail space, selling household goods in bulk sizes, like an Amazon meets Costco type of situation. So after that, having that experience and just really enjoying being part of that space, being able to go into something that's really new and growing, like telehealth, especially a more mission-driven environment, was something that I was looking for. So I was able to kind of join that way.
It's a pretty large move in regards to kind of going full scope to direct consumer with a lot of heavy focus on, I'm sure, the CRM side of things. Tell us a little bit about that relationship with what you deal with day to day, like the marketing and the CRM focus of what you deal with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how many people here in the D2C space, or especially if you're not necessarily in healthcare, you might view us from the outside in not necessarily having as much sort of emphasis in that area, but that's so far from the truth in that regard, because whether it's a sort of more medically simplistic sort of condition like hair loss, where it is more straightforward. There's two sort of medications that are FDA approved. You still have to have that emotional connection and that overall relationship that you're building with the patient, because what we're trying to build at 30 Madison is less around a transactional type of the easier way to get medications, but really that end-to-end experience as you start to link up with doctors and things like that as well. And so we provide not only that initial sort of educational pieces about the condition. I mean, there's so many different misinformation that's out there, or different types of treatments that might not actually be beneficial. And so you really have to have that connection with that person from the start, which is very similar to, I think, the way that we think about the connection with our brands overall.
So as it relates to the medical side of things and finding the consumer who's maybe looking into something that they don't even know what they may need, how do you guys really identify connecting them with the right product, making sure that you're positioning yourselves as subject matter experts in the space from that standpoint?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, no matter what brand that we're working on, so like I said, I'll just take Cove as the example. The more, I don't know if anyone here has, knows anyone or suffers from migraines themselves, but it's so complex. There's so many different types of medications and treatment plans and testing and learning that you have to do with your doctor. And so for us, it's been really important to learn a lot more about that patient, like where they are in their sort of journey. This could be someone who is just suffering from this condition for the very first time, or someone who maybe has had this for their entire life and just hasn't had to the ability to connect with a specialist. Huge variety of our patient base, especially those who are not in cities, have no access to that specialist care, and it sometimes takes months to get access to them. So by creating that environment where you can not only learn about the condition in more detail, again, sort of test and learn, sort of share with your doctors, what you've been trying, and then connect that to the actual patient experience and the treatment plans, that, as you can imagine, is a ton of efforts across, CRM and product and sort of the customer experience in general as they go through, our system. So it's a really sort of important part of, that journey to create.
Yeah. We talked a little bit earlier, American Eagle was talking about like sequential messaging and some of that consumer journey and how they look at that. From your brand standpoint, whenever you're looking at the approach overall of the different channels, can you tell us about the channel mix, like what you guys are doing in market? And does it vary amongst the different brands?
It really does, right? So let's just take Keeps, our men's hair loss brand, as an example. That one is a lot more, I would say, traditional D2C in that sense of again, there's not a whole ton of variety in the medications. It's a little bit more simplistic. There may be misinformation that's out there, but the sort of mix is more or less that traditional D2C, right? The way that I like to kind of frame it is in 3 different ways, right? So the first being that let's call it direct response type of ads that I think we all know and are familiar with, right? So we're no stranger to the Facebook, Googles of the world as ways of acquiring our customers. But the other parts of it I think are important as well. And so we've been really leaning heavily into, say, influencer as an example, as a sort of really growing channel for us. It's a little bit less like DR, right? You don't have to click on an ad and go directly to the page to convert, but you're really creating that introduction to people who may or may not know that these medications even exist. I mean, for a lot of guys, and our stats say that 66% of men actually go through some sort of hair loss in their life. They generally have no idea of where to start or how to learn more about the condition. And so by using influencers, and as an example, we do quite a bit on YouTube as an example. And we work with creators that are completely, irrelevant to, say, hair loss, right? That could be gaming or automotive or, sort of the list goes on. And it really helps us do 2 things. I think one, it helps us, again, like reach the consumer where they are, right? But the second being, it allows us to also understand what our patients are like actively interested in, which I think is sometimes difficult to find out, right? And so by partnering up with different influencers that again might be across, like 100 different niches that we advertise in, it really allows us to tap more into, what that patient is interested in, which has helped us, fill in the gaps of some of our marketing. So that's been like a really sort of interesting sort of move that we've done recently.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned gaming. Is that an area that has been surprising to you, or did you guys double down in that area?
Yeah, it's I think again, right, like we're, especially for Keeps, the men's hair loss brand, right, we're trying to tap into men in their 20s, maybe early 30s, like just starting to see some of the effects of their hair loss, or maybe they haven't, but they look at their dad and they're like, oh, maybe I don't want to inherit that hairline, right? And so they are searching for options, and a lot of those guys are just really into gaming, and so we've really leaned down into that area because we've seen it effective from the start. But then, as you start to learn more about that niche, you get very detailed. So, as an example, I don't know if anyone here either plays or used to play Magic the Gathering. It's this card game. I always love to bring this up as an example because, I would say 50% of the time people have heard of it. Has anyone heard of Magic the Gathering here? Anyway, we do quite a bit of advertising on. That's a good number. Yeah. We do quite a bit of advertising with Magic the Gathering channels because we found that again. It's lower cost for us, but we get in front of an audience that really, has resonated, and then we can use that targeting, elsewhere, especially as, more of those platforms like Facebook are getting worse and worse about like direct targeting. You have to kind of get creative on how you target those consumers. So
that's awesome.
That's like one way that we've been able to do it, which I love to talk about.
That's awesome. So a little bit of trouble since Mike Jackson said I'm going to stir the pot. Is Roku still in the room? Oh. Well, whenever we chatted a little bit, you told me a little bit about the mix of linear and what you guys are doing in there. Tell us how that's working for you and how you've balanced like the, CTV, OTT space with linear.
It's been a really interesting challenge that we faced as a D2C brand, right? Because your idea is probably that CTV is going to drive the right types of consumer, maybe more of the right type of consumer to you, especially if you're targeting more, millennial, Gen Z type of consumer. But for us, I think you tend to forget some of the effectiveness of those traditional channels, and so linear is actually for us right now like a larger portion of our spend. Partly because again, we can do sort of direct like DR type of targeting on the types of shows that we're on. But it's been a sort of interesting learning experience for us because we kind of keep leaning into CTV. I would say can't get it into a point where it's the majority of our spend, but a lot of different signals or new platforms that are coming out today might be how we think about the future, right? Like with brands like HBO or Netflix getting into the ad space game. So it's been sort of an interesting like test and learn for us. But yeah, we have a don't forget about linear is what I love to say to people, even if your audience may not have that. We found that by doing, say, I don't know, like the World Cup as an example on DirecTV in bars and stuff like that, we get a lot more impression than we would if we were just targeting, at home, say YouTube, because the CPMs are so much higher. So it's like things like that you have to learn to really sort of make sure balance the right way.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are doing quite a bit as it relates to the traditional top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel or vitamins as it was referenced earlier. Whenever you're looking at that from a channel mix perspective, are you really segmenting things out? Are you looking at certain measurement that works for you as multiple brands in different ways?
Yeah. So I would say for I think anyone here who currently who here currently advertises on Facebook and Google, and it's like hopefully it's everyone, right? Or at least the most of us. As we know, like the targeting on those platforms are getting worse and worse and worse, right? It's gotten to a point where, for us, we almost majority of the time will just do broad targeting and think about like the customer experience as a way of filtering out customers that may not be ready for the types of treatments that we have, right? And so we've created, say, instead of doing like a sort of pure e-commerce approach, for those of you that might have brands that have a little bit more education or that connection that I mentioned earlier, you might want to create like a different type of flow to acquire those customers. And so we have mini quizzes on many of our platforms, particularly our higher acuity conditions, because we want to learn a little bit more about that consumer before they decide to make a purchasing decision with us. And so that's been really a good way of filtering out when some of these platforms are getting worse and worse on their own targeting. And to be fair, you can also like help then train the Facebook or Google algorithms to actually send you the right types of traffic. So that's kind of the way that we've been playing it. I think more and more sort of direct sort of niche targeting is just getting way too expensive. And that's what we've heard from our Facebook and Google teams as well. It's like they're leaning much more into that space of, kind of trust us, which is a hard thing to get beyond. But sometimes that's what you actually need to do in order to sort of see the evolution, especially, post iOS 14.5, in 2021. So it's been a big learning sort of, curve for us in the past year to get to this point.
That's awesome. Doing these intake quizzes that you referenced sounds almost like instead of just depending on, Meta, like grading their own homework, as we say, you actually can look at something that's top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, of if they're actually in market for something or, what opportunity there is to kind of even remarket to them.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's also an element here of, again, like how do you, especially in the day and age where you're getting less and less, fewer signals about the consumers, like how do you sort of, again, learn more about your consumers as they're coming to you and then use that, more personalized approach, like as they get further into your, whatever product you're trying to sell, right? And so as an example with our men's hair loss brand Keeps, you might be a 50-year-old, trying this sort of treatment for the 5th or 6th time, or you might be a 20-year-old, like literally just doing this for the first time. And having two different approaches for that audience is really important, especially as again, like some of the advertising or some of the, there's a lot of like UGC content that we use right now. That's not going to resonate at all if, I don't know, you're in your 50s and you see like a 20-year-old guy with a full crop of hair like just talking, right? It's like a very different sort of problem area or sort of condition that you're thinking through, right? And so being able to incorporate that first-party data into your CRM and like outreaches to your patients and to your customers is kind of like the way that we've modified our approach to make sure we're talking more towards the type of person versus just more as a blended whole.
Yeah. You hit a little bit on influencer and content separately, but bringing them together. Tell us a little bit about what you guys have been doing from the influencer standpoint, and are you using them just as the content creator approach or influencers?
Yeah, I think influencer is like a really, really interesting one. It depends on how your company is planning on treating it, right? Because there's some influencer programs that are built just for brand awareness, and we do a little bit of that. But I'd say like as a growing brand, we haven't been around too long, about 6 years now. We have to combine that with the direct response type of advertising as well. So our dollars in, dollars out, like it actually does matter from a customer acquisition standpoint. And so we try to take it into a few different approaches. I mentioned already, say on YouTube, like how we think about different type of creators that might have content that's interesting to our patients, and again, meeting them where they are, introducing them to the brand the first time, and then once they sort of come to our site, we're able to talk to them in a different way, or again, say you came here because of XYZ influencer. But I would also think about influencer content, particularly in your like the content that you use and create for your ads, or again, just as another way of helping educate consumers of like how they would use that product or the benefits that they get from it. And you can take that content and use it in blogs and in ads and things like that. And so we sort of combine both of those avenues as the way of kind of, again, marrying the whole brand side of influencer versus a direct response like working media side, which I think has been a really sort of important distinction.
Yeah, that's a great point in regards to like splitting the two. Have you, and this is getting a little bit on the weeds, so you can tell me if you weren't prepared for it, but whenever you've seen influencer content, have you actually had the opportunity of taking that and then repurposing it for other marketing standpoints for the creative piece?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, some individuals, we will definitely, work that into the contract of being able to use their content through ads and things like that. We try to lean more towards like real stories, and so a lot of our advertisements actually showcase like real patients like talking, because again, just the empathetic nature of the healthcare space is something that we want to lean into, and think more about like real human stories versus more paid for stories.
Yeah.
But look, there are some times where that content works really well, especially from an education standpoint. And then, like I said, even with YouTube, it is a little bit more complex. And if you're curious, you can find me after this to go more into the weeds. But there are times where we'll use their content. Sometimes where we don't, just because it's frankly too expensive to do it. But we have found that the creativity of that space is astounding. Like we had one channel literally create a cartoon series about our brand. That we never even asked about. We never told them to do something like that. They just decided to animate like shorts that essentially became our commercials within their channel, which I thought was so cool as like a sort of added on way of again like connecting or getting a piece of content that you wouldn't have thought about normally.
Yeah, the stuff that you would never predict that would actually
I mean,
work.
these are really creative people, right?
Yeah.
And so like being able to tap into them as well is
That's
huge.
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. So you have multiple brands. You have a lot of channels in the mix, including some traditional heavy focus and measurement that sounds like it's a little bit of everywhere. How do you guys do all this? How are you actually built as a team, agencies? Who's involved in everything?
Yeah, and again, we do consider ourselves to be a startup still, right? Like we're definitely an earlier player in a space that does, I hate to use the cliche, but does need sort of some disruption. However, you have to kind of figure out that right balance between like internal versus external, right? Like a lot of our tests will start with agency partners or again like a small test budget to see if it can scale, and then once it does, like how do you bring that in-house in the right way? And how do you balance like where you need experts, say TV as an example? I would hate to ever leave, some of the agencies that we work with just because of their deep, deep connections in the space. But then there's some stuff like, say, Facebook as an example, where you may not need to spend that extra, let's call it 10%-ish, right, on an agency, and that's going to save you hundreds of thousands, if not more, depending on your budget, right? So being able to kind of balance those things has been really important for us. We've centralized our teams to work across the brands, but when it does make sense to specialize, we'll have someone who kind of sits between two, different brands, just given the fact that, they might have that expertise, say, in the paid search channel as an example. So it's a little bit of a complicated mix from the outside in, but it really, is a way that we can maximize like the efficiency of our team without sacrificing, again, the ability to just test something quickly, learn, and then, scale it appropriately.
Got it. And whenever it relates to all of these different people that you're working with, different channels, you told us earlier about measurement, but how do you kind of bring that together from a measurement standpoint?
Yeah. This is another topic where if you if you want to talk to me after this, I'm happy to go into more detail. It's I would say if there was a perfect measurement system, we'd probably all be using it, right? And so you really have to think about what works for your brand. Like we have our own internal measurement where we can see all the signals of activity people are doing on our site, and we have, of course, more traditional things like how you heard about a survey, stuff like that we try to bring together in like one algorithm. But we've been sort of leaning much more into things like MMM, modeling, right, as a way to allow us to allow us to sort of understand the signals of our spend and like spikes when we have like larger spend drops and things like that. And that's really helped us, I think, evolve to the next level to see, all right, well, we tend to see less maybe efficacy past this level of spend, so we should sort of keep it at a certain area or maybe try to expand it differently than just putting more money into the engine, right? And so that's been one way that we've been able to evolve beyond just like that basic sort of first or last click methodology that you might have. So it's it's a learning process, I would say. But definitely one that we're investing in because the fewer and fewer signals that you're going to get in the future, you're going to want to rely more on your first party data and like your spend sort of scheduling and things like that will help inform the right level of your marketing spend.
Yeah, that's well said. And obviously, being direct to consumer, you get a lot more data than being a walk-in retailer, brick and mortar. So. We're going to transition to questions. I'm going to kick off a question just in the spirit of the evolution of retail. I'm curious if you recall the last thing that you actually were that you bought based off of an ad that you saw.
Oh man, so I'm definitely not the type who maybe because we're all marketers here, right? Like seeing ads that you get a little bit jaded for it, but I do a lot of my own. I don't know, like research after I see something, right? Yeah. So one thing that caught my eye was like a smart oven, Tovala. They're a D2C maker. Yeah. They have a really cool product. Doing a little research, I found that it's like a really good sort of middle of the road. I'm not spending like thousands of dollars to get something in my house, but it works really well to create small meals. And I've really, it's been a huge time saver for me. So I remember that one as like, oh, this is really cool. What is this? And then I'll learn more about it. So it kind of speaks to, again, maybe not that instant reaction, but being able to show like an impression and then following that up with really good content marketing to kind of, again, sort of lay down that sell. So that was, definitely something that I use on a regular basis.
Awesome.
Yes, while you're thinking of your questions, remember who you are, where you're from. And I'll ask one for some folks that maybe saw in the audience when you said it, a clarifier, because I know what it's like to be in the room and be like, I think I know what that acronym is, but do I want to actually ask? And so I'll ask it for you to clarify. MMM, you were talking media mix modeling?
Correct, yes,
okay,
that's correct.
Just want to make sure for a second that MMA, but no, okay, good. So, again, lesson, right? Like, ask, who cares, right? And so not that all of you were scared, but I saw a few faces of like, wait. So I just figured I'd tell for you. So thank you.
No, that's a good call out.
Questions for them? Yes, here we go. I'll bring it back. Ooh, yes, my kind of guy. I love it.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I should have also stated that we're primarily a subscription service. However, as you may or may not know with medication, right? Like you may not get that instant sort of change or sort of relief, or in the case of hair loss, it takes about 4 to 6 months for the medications to actually start working. And so that's a big opportunity and sort of issue in some ways, right? Because we're telling people to take months of medications without seeing necessarily that effectiveness right away. And so that's where especially for brands where it's not an instant sort of unlock, like how do you think about engaging with your consumer? And that's where I was talking again about the CRM space being so important and understanding more about the consumer and why they came to us, what they've done before in the past. Like we, luckily to some degree, have questionnaires where we can ask more questions of our patients, and that really helps inform then what types of content or how knowledgeable that person is about their condition, and we sort of lean into that much more heavily, habit building, stuff like that in the first 100 days, as we have found that that's a really crucial focal point of that initial customer journey. So that's like one way that we approach that.
Awesome. Any others? And for the record, it may be the accent, but if that's your shout, that's like the politest shout I've ever heard. So nice work. Other questions? Yes. Name and where you're from.
Greg, I work at Datari. I also know Seiya, so I don't want to put him on the spot here. But you mentioned audience targeting, and coming from TV, I know it's a challenge to do that. And so many brands that we speak with come from digital, and they're used to audience targeting. So that's an intimidating step for them when they come to TV, right? And so, can you speak maybe to more how you leverage the broad reach of, you mentioned linear, right, and how that sort of feeds that engine to then get that customer data that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, this even goes back to, again, what I was stating about the, what I call like the algorithmic-based platforms like a Facebook or a Google, right? Like where we know that direct targeting or more sort of niche targeting is getting more and more expensive, and honestly not really even useful mode of acquiring your customers. TV is somewhat similar in that you can't exactly target the right, that specific person. But I think we do it in a few ways. One, again, like the work that we did on influencer, right, allows us to know a lot more about what our customers are interested in, and maybe what TV programs we should try and test, and and then learn. And then, like I said, it's that consumer experience on your website as well. And so we've been able to really filter down quickly and to get to an answer of whether or not this product is right for you. Which has also helped, again, get that initial read very quickly. And so it's a little bit of like a test and experiment, just given that you can't get as deep knowledge about that space. But with linear, right, at the very least you have the more basic demographic information of who would be watching that. And so we've been leaning into that heavily, mixed with our attribution and with our customer experience on our website, that really gives us a good sort of holistic picture of what's working and what's not working fairly quickly.
Thank you. And I'm going to keep you on the stage here for this last part because I know once we start clapping for you, and then everyone's going to want your autograph, and they'll go running. So you're staying here for this part. Just stay comfortable. But before we transition to lunch, I've said earlier, of course, like we've got an amazing lineup, right? And they've shared so many excellent insights. But also, right, you all in the audience, even if you're not on the speaker, like you've got insights as well. We're all in this together. And so I'd like to hear from a couple of you, either key takeaways from the morning session so far, comments you want to give as a part of your thoughts from the morning sessions. And I'm sure you can imagine, if we don't have volunteers, I'm just going to pick some of you. So you either volunteer or you could be picked. So go ahead. Who's first? Awesome. Could have known it was you. Stand up, please, who you are, where you're from. I know I kind of gave you a shout out earlier, but people may have missed it.
I'm Mike Ford from Skydio, and I just want to know what Broadway shows you were in a past life.
All right, well played, well played. None, no, 0 Broadway shows. Although with 4 kids and whatever, it kind of feels like my life is a constant Broadway show, but no Broadway shows. Thank you, though. Any other takeaways? I'm kidding. Those of you that know me, I will just pick people. Okay.
So to the earlier question on the linear and data balance, I'll call it, one of the, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing this already, but one of the things that I like to geek out on is the ability to actually look at the data of who's already been reached from a linear standpoint. So many houses out there have, so many data providers have household like data to actually retarget or to extend, like to actually reach those consumers. So it's not necessarily like even about the choosing one or the other. It's about doing both the right ways that kind of make it more exciting, I feel, with more and more data that's available. So doing your linear buy and knowing who you didn't reach, and then being able to reach them in, you know, CTV opportunities as well. So.
Absolutely. And to that point, does anyone else still find it funny, like, and maybe have friends or family members that, you know, I know we're in this industry, but where they kind of like still feel like it's this big magical mystery that they're like getting targeted with certain things, and you're kind of like, I mean, I don't mean to take the magic out of it, but that's not by accident, right? Like, who else still has people in their life, if any, that are like, yeah, a couple of us talked earlier, like, yeah, wow, that's crazy. You're like, what the? Let's not get paid anyway, okay? Other takeaways. You know, I'm going to pick on you because A, we know each other, and B, you had a really great takeaway earlier that we talked about from one of the morning sessions that you mentioned from American Eagle. See, I'm really picking on you.
I don't remember what I said. I guess it was really smart, though, if it left an impression.
Who are you? Where are you from?
Oh, sorry. My name is Allie Dembachek. Hi. I'm from Lactalis US Yogurt. You don't know that brand, but you know our brands Stonyfield Organic Yogurt and Siggy's Icelandic Style Skier and Brown Cow, I'm sure. I think one of the key takeaways was a lot about all of us have a lot of data, right, that we pour over and analytics and insights. And I think headed into this brave new world of meta and the opportunity to use that information, but still try to make strategic, bold moves is something I think we all are sharing quite a bit on, right? Like, how do we balance things that I need to go to my leadership team with? I know it's going to prove out. I know I'm going to find the right people to target, but at the same time, like, let's try something new. Let's fail fast together, learn from it, and then apply it to the next thing.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fine. One more. Were you volunteering? Is that what you were doing? I'm kidding. One more. I'm going to come. There we go. That's funny. You were literally the one in my mind. I was like, she's been here all morning.
It's the curls. Yeah. It's actually not a takeaway. It's a question.
First name and where you're from.
My name is Meredith. I'm from Boston. I do influencer marketing and a whole bunch of other things. I don't think this. Oh, it is on. Okay. But my question for you, Seiya, is because I'm in the world of influencer. I'm curious for your brand, is the value that you see in influencer, does it come from the fact that the content is cheap, or because it genuinely, like it's because the audiences resonate with it, or where does it mostly come from?
It's definitely the audience resonate, you know, how it resonates with the audience, you know, particularly on our YouTube sort of influencer side, just because those are, you know, in some of the creators, like I really recommend everyone just kind of try to find, you know, something that you're interested in, Google it and YouTube, and, you know, you're probably going to find a creator that has like a sort of organic way of talking about a brand in the, you know, in the video itself. That's just been really good content for us, and a really good and more natural way of talking about, you know, what we do, more so than really any other channel in a way, right? Because again, these are people that you know, are trusted sources, or that might be something that's really you know, interesting again to that particular, you know, customer. And so that side has been where we've seen the most effectiveness. I think the more sort of, I'll say, traditional influencer side of like the, you know, Instagram ads or things like that, it's been helpful from a content creation perspective, but less so from a way of acquiring customers. And so I think it's just like the nature of those channels as more casual places that has really worked for us overall.
Awesome. Thank you. So now before we